Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight, and also welcome to anyone who may be streaming and watching us at home. For those here, if you could take out your cell phones, make sure they're off or put on silent, that would be appreciated, so as not to interfere with our speaker. My name is Rich Bork, and I'm a board member on the Roundtable, and I'm privileged to say that I'm also a good friend of our tonight's speaker, Jon Schulstad. Again, welcome. Please stand and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As always, we want to recognize our veterans, especially our World War II veterans. So if we could have you raise your hands or stand so you can be recognized. So Irv and Paul, thank you. Any other veterans in the room, please raise your hand and be recognized. Thank you. We're a nonprofit organization, I think, as you know, and greatly appreciate any fundraising assistance that you can provide. As you saw when you walked in, we have a table with books for sale and coffee mugs, and our helmet committee will be standing at the rear of the room as you leave tonight. So they'll be happy to accept any donations you may wish to drop in the helmets. On this day in World War II, 1940, the Soviets began the massacre of 22,000 Polish officers, border guards, and intelligentsia in Katyn Forest by Stalin's order. 1942, on this date, the Japanese began the final attack on Bataan. 1944, 42 Royal Navy torpedo bombers from the British aircraft carrier HMS Victorious hit the German battleship Tirpitz in Alten Fjord in Norway. And in 1945, General Douglas MacArthur was named Commander-in-Chief of all land forces in the Pacific, and Admiral Chester Nimitz was named Commander-in-Chief of all naval forces in the Pacific. Upcoming events. You saw some on the screen before the program started. World War II weekend at the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum in Reading will take place on June 6th, 7th, and 8th. There are brochures on the table in the back. And I'm a volunteer there and can tell you that, to our knowledge, that's the largest living history World War II event in the world. There's also going to be a military weekend at the World War II American Experience, July 25th to 27th. And the Scions of the 17th Airborne Division will host the 80th anniversary reunion of the Battle of the Bulge and Operation Varsity, April 11th to 14th in Gettysburg. There will also be a rededication of the Battle of the Bulge Memorial at USAHEC in Carlisle on April 12th at 2 p.m. and a candlelight memorial service on April 13th at 1:30 p.m. at Gettysburg Presbyterian Church. All are welcome to attend. For more information, please see Patty at her table in the back after the program. On April 23rd at 6:30 p.m. at USAHEC in Carlisle, the Perspectives in Military History lecture series will feature Dr. Daniel Krebs. His subject will be From Trenton to Carlisle, Hessian Soldiers in American Hands, 1776 to 1778. I hope you had our chance to read the slide with a message from our wonderful host here, Grace United Methodist Church, concerning upcoming initiatives they're taking to make improvements, repairs, and upgrades to this building, particularly to roofing and exterior walls. And they asked if anyone in our group knows of any church-friendly suppliers to please let them know. Also, if anyone wants to make a financial donation, feel free to use the green envelopes in the pews and place them in the offering cans or plates at the back of the church, or you can drop them in the helmets and we'll make sure they get them. We're pleased to say that we've completed an update to our Roundtable website that I trust you will find to be attractive, clear, and easy to navigate. So please make sure to visit it at www.centralpawwiiroundtable.com. Also, if you miss any meetings and speakers, you can catch up with them on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. You just go to youtube.com and type in Central Pennsylvania World War II Roundtable. That's also where you can stream our programs if you're not able to make it here live. So our guest speaker tonight is a personal friend of mine. Jon Schulstad is a retired U.S. Air Force officer who lives in Fairfax, Virginia, with his lovely wife, Penny. He's the son of World War II B-17 pilot Mel Schulstad. Jon served 23 years in the Air Force, including 9 years in Europe. Much of his time in the Air Force was devoted to target intelligence and targeting. He could tell us more, but then he'd have to, well, you know the rest. After retiring from the Air Force, he worked for 24 years as a defense contractor in the Washington, D.C. area. Let's see, 23 and 24. Man, you're old, Jon. As you will learn, he also assisted in the writing of a book by a French author about the loss of the B-17 Beats Me. His presentation will address some aspects of that particular mission and his dad's history, but in general will provide an overview of B-17s in Europe, including their design, crews, organization, strategy, and employment. So before I bring Jon up, I wanted to provide a little background as to how we came to know one another. My dad, Master Sergeant Alexander Bork, was a ground crew chief on B-17s in England during World War II, stationed at RAF Molesworth with the 303rd Bomb Group. Ground crews were assigned to a single aircraft at a time. His first ship, and that's what they call them, was Beats Me, and Mel Schulstad, Jon's dad, was the pilot. The two men, one enlisted and one an officer, formed a strong bond that lasted for the rest of their lives. It stands to reason when the lives of the pilot and 9 other men rely on the performance of the aircraft in which they are flying to take them to war and bring them back home safely, day after day, month after month. So Jon will tell the story of his dad and Beats Me. My connection goes back to the early 2000s. My dad had passed away in 1998, and several years later, I received a call out of the blue. The caller said, "Hello, my name is Jon Schulstad, and I'm here with my father, Mel. He would like to speak with you." Both our dads had stayed in touch over the years and attended numerous 303rd Bomb Group reunions. The 303rd alumni had a fairly robust organization through which family contact information was also shared, and that's how they reached out to me. Mel proceeded to tell me how much he respected my dad and the job he and his ground crew did to maintain his ship in tip-top condition. That made a marked impression on me, but was the last time I spoke to Mel before he passed away in 2012. Several years later, Jon reached out to me, again from the 303rd connection, and we've been in touch ever since. While Jon is coming up here, we're going to show about 10 minutes of a 30-minute video of Mel recounting his experiences to a local PBS station in the state of Washington where he resided. I'd like you to keep a couple things in mind while watching the video. It is captioned, and for the most part, they did a good job, with a couple of minor exceptions. You will hear Mel refer to a batman, which in Britain, in the British military, was an enlisted man assigned to an officer as a personal servant or orderly. But the captioning says bagman. So it's not a bagman, it's a batman. Also, he talks about a British Wellington bomber, but the video is of a B-17. They're minor issues, but to be sure, sharp eyes, I'm sure, will catch them. So with that, we're going to start the video. Tim, if you want to start the video. And it'll take about 10 minutes, and then we'll bring Jon up.
We are artists and explorers. We are liberators and survivors. We are fighting for peace and finding the cure. We're remembering the past and looking to the future. We are caring for each other, and we are proud. We are Western Washington. These are our stories, and this is your program.
When the United States Army Air Forces began daytime bombing missions over Western Europe in 1942, no one knew what to expect. An operation like this had never been attempted. Retired Colonel Louis Mel Schulstad of the 303rd Bomb Group was among the first pilots to lead these bombing missions. He recalls the early days of World War II and the impossible odds that these brave men faced to ensure the safety and freedom of generations to come. From Normandy to VE Day, Colonel Schulstad made history as one of the few pilots to fly more than 40 missions over enemy airspace. Tonight, Full Focus presents a special look at the contribution of Colonel Louis Mel Schulstad, honor his service, and the sacrifices made by hundreds of thousands of other brave men and women who have served this country during times of war.
There's a war going on over there in Europe. We read about it in the papers, a little bit on the radio, hardly anything on TV. Edward R. Murrow was telling us about what was going on in London. But in 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. Now, of course, I'm a kid. I'm 21 years old. I took an oath and joined the Army, and I'm now enlisted. There I went through boot camp training. So we had a lot of learning to go through there in a very short time.
Mel Schulstad had dreamed of being a pilot. He'd even taken a few flying lessons back home on a little Piper Cub. The Army would train him to pilot a 4-engine, 4,800 horsepower airplane known as the Flying Fortress and assign him to a bombardment group in the 8th Air Force.
I acquired a crew. They issued me a B-17 Boeing. You know, in the Army, they issue you stuff and you sign for it. One pair of shoes. I signed for a B-17, one each B-17. I was now a part of a squadron, which was part of a bomb group. Some of the guys started naming their airplanes, maybe after their wife, Mary Jo, or movie star Jane Russell, or somebody like that. So we had to have a name on our airplane, and I lined up the crew: co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, engineer, radio operator, ball turret gunner, waist gunner, and tail gunner. Okay, guys, you got an airplane here. We got to give it a name. You're going to name it, whatever you want to call it. What do you want to call it? I don't know. Down the road we went. Nobody knew what to call the airplane. I thought, geez, one of these guys will come up with something. I got to the tail gunner. He shrugged his shoulders. He said, "Beats me." That's the name of the airplane, Beats Me. Beats me. In November, my crew and I were told that we were going to go to England. That's where we were going to fight this war. And then we were told, tomorrow night at midnight is takeoff time. Here I am with a crew of 10 people, the airplane full of gas. I'm going someplace I've never heard of before, and it's 8 hours away, and I got 8.5, 9 hours of gas. So I better not get lost. I better not go roaming around. I better go pretty directly with that navigator up there with his Christopher Columbus equipment and a radio that wouldn't go over 200 miles, and this is 1,800 miles away. So we took off at midnight in a blinding rainstorm. I had never taken off before at night, at black of night, in a blinding rainstorm. Well, I'm a second lieutenant, I'm a pilot. And the man said, "Go." Here we go. We got over there by the grace of God. Next day, we were told we were going to our new base in central England, which was by name of Molesworth, England. Halfway down there, we were told, do not proceed, do not proceed. The weather has closed in, and you are now located at such and such, or you should be by your navigation experts. Turn in and land at RAF base so-and-so. Well, there it was. We went in there and landed because we were ordered to. Well, they received us as best they could. We had our dinner that evening, and then this Batman shows up. He says, I'm going to prepare a room for you, 4 of you up here. And so he says, you come along, and he helps us carry our bigger baggage upstairs. We go into this corner bedroom, which has got 4 bunks in it, obviously occupied because each bunk's got a table and a chair, and on the tables are pictures of Mom and the kids and girls and brothers and family and the graduation high school class and cigarettes and ashtray and, you know, the everyday stuff. So this Batman goes in there and he's got a big basket, and he goes up and he starts cleaning off these tables of all this personal memorabilia, dumping it in this basket as if it were trash. And I said something, I said, you don't have to do that, we're just going to be here one night. Oh, he says, these boys didn't come home last night. Oh, they didn't come home? No, they were on ops. They got shot down. Oh, people get shot down like that and they don't come home, and you clean out the room like, oh yeah, all the time. Wow. It sunk in a little bit. This is a war. This is a war. If people getting shot and getting killed, they don't come home. Wow. Well, that was kind of a rude awakening. Next morning, I'm walking back out to my airplane with my crew, where they'd gone on ahead, and I was kind of by myself, and I walk around this Wellington, and Jesus, it's all shot up. It's got holes in it, and big piece of the elevator's missing, and oh, wow, this guy's he brought this thing home, yeah. And then in the back, in the very tip of the tail back there was a sort of a round birdhouse-like thing, glass, where the rear gunner sat, and he could swivel his guns around like this in this little cage made out of glass. And I looked up in there and I thought, oh my God, that's the remains of a human being. Blood, pardon the expression, blood and guts all over the place. They haven't gotten around to cleaning this out yet. This airplane just got back last night. There's a human being. Blood. Awful. It started to sink in what this war was going to maybe be about. Up to then, it had been kind of, hey, let's go off and find a war? Pass the whiskey. We're out of whiskey? Why? We'll drink scotch. That's okay. No scotch? Well, let's drink beer. What the hell? Heidi-ho. Heidi-ho. Clean off the tables, throw the stuff away, or send it home to Mama. I don't know what they did with it. Gutty remains, bloody remains of one aircrew guy. How many others were there like that? Don't know. We didn't know much about how to fight the war. There was no book on it. Nobody had ever done this before. We were going to go up and fly 3 airplanes at a time. No, that won't work either. We got to put 3 and 3, though. We got 6 airplanes at a time. That's a squadron in the air, 6 airplanes. And we used to tack on a 7th, just in case. So we had 7 airplanes, all in one little air squadron. Now you put 3 of those 7 airplanes together. You use a lead group, a high group, and a low group. 7 and 7 and 7. 21 B-17s, all under the command of one guy up there in the front airplane. And we didn't know hardly anything at all.
The 8th Air Force flew daylight missions over France.
So that's the first 10 minutes of a half-hour presentation. And if you're interested, we'll try to get you the link so you can go on and watch it, because the rest of it is just as enthralling and gut-wrenching as that was. So without any further ado, I'm going to have Jon Schulstad come up and talk to us about B-17s in Europe.
Thank you, Rich. Can we have the first slide, please? Or I guess I'm in charge here. I can do it. Can I do it? Let's see. Wait, back here? Oh, okay. There we go. All right. Let me give a preface. First of all, I'm highly honored to be here. I've given this presentation about 8 or 9 times, and I want to tell you in 1 minute or so how this presentation came to be. And I'm hoping this audio works. Can one of you guys in the back row, everybody's okay, good. In 2012, I was invited to American Legion post in Maine, and it just so happens this American Legion post was named after one of the crew members of my dad's Beats Me crew. He was like 19 years old, a waist gunner, and his name was Jerry Dobbins, and they named the American Legion post the Jerry Dobbins American Legion post because I think he was one of the first youngsters in World War II killed from the state of Maine. Anyway, at that particular meeting, you're going to find out the second name, Chuck Roth, was at that meeting because Chuck Roth and Jerry Dobbins were both crew members, and Jerry Dobbins saved Chuck Roth's life by giving him his oxygen mask at the time of this crash of the B-17 that I'm going to describe in detail. Anyway, they had the senator from the state of Maine there, Susan Collins. They were going to give Jerry Dobbins a posthumous award. And Chuck Roth, if you met Chuck Roth, he's a man of few words. He was basically a rancher from Colorado. And he called me up and he said, John, he said, I don't want to give any speeches. Would you please come up to Maine and tell all these people, several hundred people, the story of Beats Me. So I put together this presentation that you're going to see to explain to a largely non-military audience, a lot of youngsters, teenagers, 20-year-olds from the family, you know, how this whole World War II B-17 operation unfolded. Now, that's the opposite of this group. I'm driving up here today, and I'm thinking I'm probably going to learn more about B-17s from some people in this audience than I ever knew. So I'm hoping we can share some information, and you can call me out on anything I say, and I may ask you for some advice on some of the details you're going to see. So anyway, this was built for a civilian audience in Stockton Springs, Maine, 13 years ago. All right. Always good to start with, where are we going, okay? I'm hoping to talk 35 minutes, and there's 2 rules, neither of them are ironclad. I'd like to go through the whole briefing without questions. However, if you see something on a slide here that provokes you and you need to find out what the hell was that acronym John just used, you're allowed to wave and interrupt me. Otherwise, we're going to do the march. Okay, so a little bit of World War II history, you know, what happened to aviation in World War I, what happened between the 2 world wars with aviation. If I say the name Charles Lindbergh, probably everybody would say, yeah, that was a pretty significant aviation event. Titillated tons of American teenage boys about wanting to become pilots. And then World War II. Well, we didn't get into World War II. I served an exchange tour with the RAF, the Royal Air Force in Britain. Okay, you all heard of the Battle of Britain. Well, that was, you know, almost 2 years before the United States Army Air Corps, renamed U.S. Army Air Forces, was involved in this war in Europe. And then I'm going to talk about the 8th Air Force, and of course I'm a proud B-17 progeny. To me, the 8th Air Force was the B-17s, but we have to acknowledge there were B-24s, there were P-38s, there were P-47s than there were P-51s. I'll talk about that very briefly. And then we're going to focus in on one base, i.e., in World War II terminology for the 8th Air Force, one base equals one bombardment group. That's a big word, bombardment. Quickly shortened to bomb group. And each bomb group typically would have 3 or maybe 4 bombardment squadrons, bomb squadrons. I'm a member of the 360th Bomb Squadron. And then I'm going to talk about, this is early in the war. I mean, you heard my father's words. They had basically showed up in November of 42. Well, hell, Pearl Harbor was December of 41. It took us 10 or 11 months as a country to build up a bunch of B-17 crews, send them across the Atlantic Ocean, and have them start a strategic bombing campaign that I'm going to describe. And then I'm going to talk mainly about the first 11 missions that the 303rd Bomb Group flew. And if I say this word, the Battle of the Atlantic, okay? At that point in the war in Europe, Mr. Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Mr. Churchill had agreed that the focus of attention for the U.S. militarily was not going to be Japan, who attacked Pearl Harbor. It was going to be Herr Hitler and what his armies were doing and his Luftwaffe was doing in Europe. So the Battle of the Atlantic was very vital because we have any merchant marine type seamen in this room. So without those ships and those men, we weren't going to have fuel, bombs. The Brits were not going to have food to eat. I mean, they rationed food from 1939 on. So the flow of convoys from our East Coast ports all the way to the Kola Peninsula of Russia, because we were basically supplying Mr. Stalin's army with material, was vital. So Mr. Churchill and Mr. Roosevelt said, yes, we've got to win the Battle of the Atlantic. Well, that means attacking Unterseeboots, in English parlance, U-boats. So you're going to find out that the first 11 missions here that the Air Force was flying was not against Nazi Germany. It was against German U-boat bases in France. And I'm going to show you some maps and some pictures. So that's the overview. All right, the stars of our show. Okay, this is the typical B-17 crew, 4 officers, navigator, bombardier, pilot, co-pilot. In those days, they called the commanding officer, i.e. the pilot, was known as the first pilot, and the guy in the right seat was known as the co-pilot. Left seat, pilot, aircraft commander, right seat, co-pilot. So, I think I talked about Jerry Dobbins in Maine here. This is Chuck Roth, and we'll go through these other names in order here. All right, quick history, very quick history. World War I, biplanes, Baron von Richthofen, people shooting pistols at each other. They actually put a machine gun on these triplanes and biplanes so that they could have aerial battles. You know, that's where pilots learned how to talk with their hands. Even late in World War I, you know, some guys were throwing hand grenades at the ground, at targets there. That was the, quote, the bombing campaign in World War I, practically non-existent. But there was a lot of potential, at least aviation theorists thought there was. And so during the interwar years, you had all kinds of theorists talking about why should we be killing tens of millions, or not tens of millions, sorry, millions of young men, German, French, Brits, and Americans, in trench warfare. We could get these wars over with in a hurry if we could take the war back beyond the front lines to the rear areas where all this war material was being built and then shipped forward. Bring the war to the home folks. They can see some of the horror of war themselves. So the interwar years, I don't want to throw out names of theorists, but anyway, there was a lot of discussion of this new concept of strategic bombardment, okay? Get the war over with in months, not 4 years. And then I mentioned Charles Lindbergh. Give me a year for Charles Lindbergh. Yeah.
Well, he,
No, the year. 1927. There. Flew across the Atlantic. One guy, one airplane took off, I think, from Long Island and landed in Paris. And he was like, oh my goodness, you know, this was a world earth-shattering event. And then they had these other people running around in biplanes, flying through the open door of a barn and out the backside, and guess what they were called? Barnstormers. So lots of teenagers and young 20-year-old men got very excited about aviation. I want to do that. I want to do that. And then the theorists came in. So, and then of course we got down to, you know, monoplanes, one wing, a lot faster, a lot more maneuverable, very acrobatic. And the theorists said, we can use this new technology, the aeroplane, aircraft, airplane, whatever, to attack the means of production. If countries can't make war material, if they can't make tanks, if they can't make armored fighting vehicles, if they can't make artillery pieces, if they can't produce ammunition, the war stops. So World War II, we're going to see air power come of age. I'm going to go fast again. Now, you saw in the film this guy named Mel Schulstad talk about the early days, eager youngster, very young. I mean, I think the oldest man on my dad's crew was 28. Of the 6 enlisted, I think 2 were 19 and 3 were 20. I think my dad was 24, but he had enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps prior to the Second World War. He was pretty experienced. Although I will say this, in normal times, in 1939 and 1940, it took the Air Force, the Army Air Corps, 12 months to produce a pilot. Guess what? Pearl Harbor came. My father entered pilot training in November of 1941. Pearl Harbor came, and they came in right in January, and they said, your 12-month program has now been cut to 6 months. We need you over in Europe ASAP. So the early days, we had what I would call a lot of growing pains, okay? I mean, they had to train the radio operator. They had to train the navigator. They had to train the bombardier on the Norden bomb site. Obviously, the pilot and co-pilot had to learn how to fly the plane, and the gunners had to know how to shoot 50 caliber machine guns. And the first B-17s, and that's why it's called the Flying Fortress. The fortress part was, I think there were 11 machine guns on that airplane, okay? And you're gonna see that's gonna evolve because the discussion about crude tactics, things evolved, okay? And I think the key lesson that if you watch the rest of that film about my father was modern engineers, aircraft engineers, there's things called tech orders, okay? You don't modify an airplane unless whatever you're gonna be modifying it to do has been tested. And then some engineer validates that, yeah, this new piece of equipment is gonna solve that problem, and then you write another tech order and you implement the change to the airplane. Well, these guys were doing things with the engineering officer and his staff every week, you know. It could have been the squadron had 4 planes with this and 8 other planes with that. They just tried to evolve and adapt quickly. And of course, the Luftwaffe. What's that? Yeah, I'm pointing. Is not, oh, I'm sorry, I got to point this way, huh? Yeah, all right, thanks. Yeah, okay. Thank you. And of course, the German Luftwaffe had, you know, very professional, seasoned pilots because they had been bombing in England since 1940, and of course they had conducted operations in Holland and in Denmark and in Norway and in Poland and in France for months and months and months. They had some very experienced aircrew and some very fine airplanes. It has to be admitted, the Messerschmitt and the Focke-Wulf. Here we go. So we're going to see as time evolves that, you know, my father talked about, okay, 7 airplanes, 7 airplanes, 7 airplanes. One group could put up 21 airplanes in a group formation. And then that's going to turn into, by February of 1945, some attacks against Berlin included 1,000 plus B-17s at one time. All right, let's shift over to the 8th Air Force. I need a little help here. What is the ETO? Give that man a marshmallow. European Theater of Operations, right. So let's focus on the 8th Air Force, and then later in, over time, we'd have another strategic bombardment Air Force, the 15th Air Force, that operated in North Africa and in Italy. But the beginning of the war, November 1942, it was the 8th Air Force in England, okay? Quickly, 4-engine heavy bomber. Okay, so we had 2 heavy bombers, the B-17 and the B-24. The B-24 came later. It wasn't as hardy as the B-17. Can you name some medium bombers that came in 1944 and 1945? B-25 Mitchell, B-26 Marauder, okay, but at the beginning of the air war, it was the B-17 that was carrying the brunt of the load. So I'm going to show you slides of the crew members here, but those are the 10. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, those are the 4 officers up in the front end of the airplane. And then behind the wings, there's a little catwalk to get from the flight control part of the plane through the bomb bay to the back of the plane, where you would find the radio operator, the waist gunners, a ball turret gunner, and a tail gunner. And I forgot to mention the flight engineer. I'm going to show you a picture of where he sits here in a second. And a lot of the guys like Rich's dad loved the B-17, as did my dad, because it would take a lot of punishment. Come home, shot up, but fixable. Could fly again. Now, this is an interesting photo. This is what I would call, in horsemanship, the livery of a late model B-17. The beginning of the war, we primarily had B-17F models. The F model did not have the chin turret up in the front, okay? That was added later on in the war. I can't tell to this day the difference between a G model and an H model. Rich's dad could tell us that. The other thing is, in the back, you see that big triangle, red triangle with the C in it? That was to try to improve the ability of all these hundreds of airplanes in the air figuring out who was who. The triangle C meant that was a Molesworth 303rd Bomb Group airplane, and that helped solve one serious problem. The serious problem was, if you have 800 B-17s in the air, you've got to get them lined up by group so that they can cross the channel and perform their missions in France or in Germany. How do you do that? Well, you got to know who is who. So at the beginning of the campaign in November of 42, it was I won't say what it was. It was a mess, okay? Before they finally figured out they had to have known assembly areas in the air for the different bomb groups to get organized, and then they'd all join up and head out over the channel to their mission areas. So you're going to see different pictures, and I'll show you how things changed. What color is that airplane? OD. What's OD? Olive drab. Okay. My wife sometimes accuses me of dressing in a drab fashion. Anyway, why did we have planes colored OD? Anybody? If you're a Messerschmitt 10,000 feet up higher than this airplane and you look down, what are you going to see? You're going to see the ground. And in Europe, 9 months out of the year, the ground is brown. various shades of green, okay? That's why the color. Later in the war, we're going to see some airplanes shipped over from Wichita, from Los Angeles, and from Seattle that were raw aluminum because we had air dominance in and we didn't really care if the Luftwaffe could see us or not. We need new airplanes, don't paint them, make them heavier, cost more, just get them flying. Here's your crew. This is actually the crew of Beats Me. There's my dad, back left, pilot. The tall guy is also from North Dakota, like my dad, Roy Christensen. And then John Embach, the navigator, and Ronaldo Seiss, the bombardier, and then the gunners. We're going to visit each one of these guys in turn. Jerry Dobbins, I don't know where he was, but I know this group's got 80% military experience. Jerry Dobbins wasn't there. Where was he? He was probably getting his shot record updated. He probably had a form to fill out at the personnel office. You know, who knows? We don't know. Okay, so one base equals a bomb group. 4 squadrons. The number of aircraft assigned to each squadron evolved over time. My father was in Europe for 33 months. So, you know, the numbers built up. So the number of air crew members and the number of aircraft per squadron inched up. But let's just say for the sake of discussion at the beginning, it was 12 to 18 aircraft and 20 to 25 air crews. How many are in an air crew? 10, 250 men. And of course, you gotta be able to maintain, i.e. service, i.e. make sure the planes are flyable, have all the parts they need. And the crew chiefs were the frontline force that took care of that problem. Then they also had an engineering depot at each bomb group that did more serious things, like if you needed to change 2 of the 4 engines, well, that was gonna take 6 days. And that was a different group of engineers. And then we'll talk about flying B-17s in combat. Everybody with me so far? All right. Okay, well, I'm sure if I probably said, how many of you have ever seen the Gregory Peck movie called 12 O'Clock High? You know, 17,000 hands would go up. And you know, the old deal, the op officer walks out and he pulls back the curtain and says, the target for the day is, and all the crew go, oh my God, we're going there again. I can't believe it. So, but this is a typical mission because the Combined Forces Bomber Command with the RAF Bomber Command, the RAF flew at night because they thought it was too dangerous to fly in the day. The U.S. Army Air Forces flew in the day because they felt we can protect our bombers because of all the guns. I can't do the math, but if you have 11 guns on each B-17 and 21 B-17s, I don't know what the number is, but that's a lot of guns. So, different philosophies. So, at 11 o'clock at night, headquarters would send out, what are you going to do tomorrow? You're going to bomb a U-boat base in Brittany called Brest, B-R-E-S-T, a very large U-boat base. U-boat being submarine, who are killing shipping coming across from New York, Boston, Providence, and New Jersey by the ton. So the fragmentary order would say, we want you to produce 21 flyable B-17s. We want each of them loaded with 10 1,000-pound general purpose bombs. Here's your target. It's a U-boat base in Brittany, and you're supposed to, 4 of you are going to attack the electrical substation, 12 of you are going to attack the submarine pins, and the others of you are going to attack the chow hall, the dormitories, the submarine command post, blah, blah, blah. We call those DMPIs, the desired mean points of impact. That's where we want the bombs to land. And in these early missions, each bombardier might have a separate desired mean point of impact for him to release his bombs on. And then the fragmentary order would discuss what time are we going to take off, where is our assembly area, what are the different communication code words for all 21 planes are here, proceed, go across the channel, and now you're talking about penetrating defended airspace. What does that mean? It means the German Luftwaffe is sitting over there and they're flying back and forth on the southern edge of the channel, looking up and waiting for the B-17s to appear. And then the navigators and the bombardiers are coordinating, gee, I've got to attack this submarine base. They pick out what we call an initial point. In other words, about 10 miles away, there's a very visible bridge. And if I'm lined up on that bridge and I'm heading at the 180 radial and I cross over that bridge, then I've got about a 90% chance of finding my aim point and dropping my bombs on that aim point. And then hopefully after bomb release, we're all going to turn right, head back to base in a uniform, organized way. Now, this will probably, how many of you have actually been to England? Okay, so see if I can get this right. Here's London. This is the North Sea. There's a whole lot of southern England down here that we don't show you, and of course another 120 miles south is the English Channel. This is the location, relatively speaking, of Molesworth, the 303rd Bomb Group. Okay, here's another map for you. Whoops, wait a minute, I went too far. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, so I want to get you oriented, okay? Here's London. All of southern England is below me, another 180 miles. Here's the North Sea. Now, you notice that up here it says, help me, 1st Air Division circles, 2nd Air Division is squares, and the 3rd Air Division is stars, okay? So you're going to see, if you look at a B-17 now, certain B-17s will have a circle with a letter in it. Those are the 1st Air Division B-17s. Certain B-17s are going to have a square with a letter in it. Those are the 2nd, and so on, so we can try to figure out in flight. One of the funniest things I've ever seen was looking at an old B-17E model. Remember, we're talking about F models, G models, and H models. Those are the planes that flew in combat. The older E models, they took one of them and they painted it up with light blue with red circles on it, okay? That's not olive drab, that's not camouflage. Why did they do that? That airplane went up early in the morning and did a weather reconnaissance, and then it stayed up there and just flew little racetrack pattern, and that was when all the B-17s that were flying combat got up into the sky. They would look for that airplane because that was their join-up airplane. So that's why the big red circles and the light blue was useful. And as soon as the combat force moved off, that plane would return, land, and do something else. So you can see this area of England was known as East Anglia. And for a lot of British people, East Anglia was known as the part of the country that was the unsinkable aircraft carrier. In other words, there were probably 55 bases out there. That's not counting the Royal Air Force. That's just the U.S. Air Force, B-17, B-24, and the 3 fighter types, P-38s, P-47s, and P-51s. So once you got back across the channel, if you got back across the channel, you had no problem finding a place to land. You did not have to go back to Molesworth. If you were shot up, you could just call the tower and say permission to land. All those bases were available. Any questions on that chart? Okay. All right, this is the stylized version. Okay. Again, here's jolly old England. And when my father was talking about when they initially landed, they would land coming across the Atlantic up in Scotland. They would land at Prestwick, Scotland, and then they'd get a good night's sleep. And that little talk he gave when they flew south, they landed at an RAF base right about here, and that's where he came into his encounter with the Batman and the clearing out of the stuff out of the rooms and the shot up RAF bombers that he encountered. So now talk about the Battle of the Atlantic. This this chunk of France. How many of you have been to either Normandy or Brittany? Quite a few hands, okay. So the invasion, and I'm sure this audience has heard a lot about, Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, Sword, Juno, and Gold is up here in Normandy, but the bombing campaign against the U-boats was right here. Brest, Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, and there's two more down here. Police, and I forget the fifth name, but anyway. That's where the air war was being fought for the first 4 months, November 42, December 42, January 43, February 43. All right, I got to spend a little bit of time on this one too. If I say this name, what kind of reaction am I going to get? Curtis LeMay. Who is Curtis LeMay? Curtis LeMay was a 4-star general in the mid-60s. My father worked for him in the Pentagon. But in 1942, in November, he was a colonel, and he was in charge of one of the provisional combat wings. And he is the one who came up with this, how are we going to align our bombers to do two things? One, provide mutual protection for the entire bomb group of 21 planes, and two, present a formidable formation in the sky that's going to make the Luftwaffe fighter pilot think, ooh, do I really want to go in there and mess around with these guys, okay? So this chart is really divided into 3 parts. If you're up, let's just say that there's a formation of 21 B-17s, and they're flying at 22,000 feet. If you're at 30,000 feet looking down, you're going to see the first flight of set 6, right there, the second flight of 7, and the third flight of 7. 6, 7, and 7, 14, that's 20 airplanes. That means one of the planes that was assigned to get across the channel and do this bombing mission aborted and went home. There were 21 when they started. When they got over the target, there were 20. Now, more interesting is the side view, okay? Again, my father talked about the high squadron, those 7, the forward squadron, or the lead squadron, 6, and the low squadron, 7. And then if you're behind the whole formation, there's 21 airplanes here. If you're looking from behind, the lead squadron is up in front. You can't tell that. The low squadron is down low, and the high squadron is up here. Now, people that do operations research kind of figured out this is a good way to provide machine gunners availability to cover the entire formation without knocking other friendly airplanes out of the sky. Wasn't perfect, wasn't foolproof, but this was a good method to approach. They called this, third time I've said it, the combat box in the air. So, lots of machine guns, overlapping coverage, and of course they would like to, some days they'd bomb at 20,000 feet, some days they'd bomb at 22,000 feet, some days they'd bomb at 24,000 feet, some days they'd bomb at 18,000 feet. Why did they do that?
Fuses wouldn't have to be reset on the munitions sent by the 88s.
Say that again? That sounded good.
The Germans would have to reset
Right.
the fuses if they knew what
Very good. So the primary threat to these bombers was what we called flak, or I forget the German name. Help me out with the German name. Fliegenabwehrkanonen. Fliegenabwehrkanonen. In English, anti-aircraft defensive artillery, short name, flak. So he's talking about 88 millimeter guns on the ground. Now this is a good point to talk about, what's that series that Tom Hanks and Mr. Spielberg did? Masters of the Air. How many of you seen one or more episodes of Masters of the Air? Okay, so anyway, the 88 millimeter guns could shoot 88 millimeter projectiles up to 25,000 feet. Now, I'm going to give you 2 choices. You can have a projectile, and it's going to go up, and if it hits something, it explodes, If it doesn't hit anything, it just keeps going. Or projectile B. I have a fuse in that thing, so if it goes up and it hits something, it detonates, and if it doesn't hit anything, it goes to 22,100 feet and detonates, and all this shrapnel comes out. Which one would you prefer to have, A or B? I'd pay the money to get B. So that's why they varied the altitudes, because then the Germans didn't know exactly, well, how do we preset the fuses in these 88 millimeter projectiles? Well, the Germans were pretty clever, because they'd put a Messerschmitt 2 miles back, and he'd radio, they are at 18,000 feet. Okay, so anybody know how they rearranged the fusing? I'm not sure. I think they crimped something in the round so that they could pretty well gauge what altitude it would detonate at. So, all right, any questions on that chart? That's kind of complex. All right, and then Messerschmitt 109, single-seat fighter, Focke-Wulf 190, single-seat fighter. Actually, the Focke-Wulf was either a fighter or a fighter-bomber. Both formidable weapon systems, both very fine aircraft, and both with very skilled pilots. So, it's a tough thing. Now, there's 3 words I haven't mentioned so far that make flying in combat in Europe even worse than I've described. Word number 1 is lousy weather, okay? If I bothered to even go across the channel, what were the chances that the weatherman would be able to tell me, well, over the U-boat base at Brest, it's sunny and clear, and you can see forever. Cavu. Where's Tank? He's not here? What's Cavu mean? Ceiling and visibility unlimited. Thank you. How often does that happen in Europe? Not very often. Okay, usually it's 3/10 cloud cover or 5/10 cloud cover. So the navigator's going to have a hard time navigating, and the bombardier's going to have a hard time peering through the clouds to find the aim point. That's what problem number 1 is, weather. Problem number 2, what's the temperature if you're in a B-17 at 22,000 feet? What does it feel like in there? Minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So these guys are wearing, fleece-lined pants, fleece-lined jackets. Some of them even had electrical, heating systems. Do you have to wear, and the third thing is oxygen. You gotta have oxygen up there. And that was a big problem, because if you're an aircraft commander, a pilot, and one of the waist gunners says, hey, we just broke on the south side of the English Channel. We're now 50 miles into France, but my partner here, Ralph, the right waist gunner, he's unconscious because it looks like his oxygen mask isn't working. What are we going to do? Well, if you keep flying the mission, what's going to happen to Ralph? He's going to die. So that's a tough decision for do I abort? Then even if you abort, what happens? 20 airplanes keep going this way, and now you're going by yourself that way. So guess who the Messerschmitts are going to go after? You, yeah. So these are some of the problems that these early airmen faced. Rich, how are we doing on time? All right? Okay. B-17s delivered their bombs, fine. Normal load, 1,000-pound bombs, 500-pound bombs, different fuses for targets. Okay. Typically, targets were area targets, a big, huge armaments production factory in the Ruhr Valley, or a very large railroad yard, 2 miles long and 8 tracks wide, or an artificial gas production facility in the eastern part of Germany. I've never been to Penn State's campus, but how many acres do you think Penn State's campus is? That's probably about the size of some of the standard targets that these B-17s went after. In other words, a big area target. So you could send 3 groups, 21, 21, 21, and have plenty of parts of the target to pick out for the bombardiers to attack. But that's what it looks like in formation. All right, I don't think you can see this chart, but ordnance is a fancy military term for munitions or bombs or whatever. Typically, the B-17s, whoops, sorry, need to go back. Why was it going? I know, I'm doing this. Here. All right. Typically, these are the 500,000-pound general purpose bombs were what B-17s carried. Sometimes they'd mix in incendiaries, okay? And the bomb bay, if you're standing under, how many of you have actually been on the ramp where a B-17 is parked and either taken the tour of walking inside or at least walking around? Anybody? I'm sure at your place, I mean, the warbirds are less frequently available now, but and I don't recommend you take a ride. That probably costs $600, but a lot of times there's a static display and you can walk through it and see the bomb bay. All right, this was on the cover of Life magazine in 1944, and this was kind of like, quote, caption, typical support for one B-17, all right? So, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on the flight deck, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, the gunners, okay? And you notice in here, that's 9 crew members, okay? And then Rich's dad, the crew chief, and his staff back here, who are going to make sure the engines start, pull the chocks, check all the flight surfaces to make sure they work, operate the little electrical machine that's used to start all the electric power inside the airplane. And then you've got fueling and munitions loading. And I'm not sure, anybody, I don't know what this looks like, a fuel truck. I don't know what that one is. Fire engine, there, that makes total sense. You got these things called bombs on bomb trolleys, so it might make sense to have a fire engine. All right. All right, and the whole operation purpose was fly a mission, drop your bombs, come back to base, 10 guys still alive, airplane still intact. Now look at the livery on this one. This is a G or H model, late in the war, Triangle A. I could look up somewhere and find out that Triangle A meant I'll make up a number, 341st Bomb Group at Chelveston, okay? Okay, let's look at a specific bomb group, my favorite, 303rd Molesworth. Now, this is a very early, this is probably what a B-17 looked like when it landed at Molesworth in November 1942. Anybody can interpret that number? That's a serial number, okay? Notice the first digit is 1. That means it was built in 1941. I don't know, I guess they didn't have enough room to put the 4 in front of the 1. So it was built in 1941, and the serial number was 264638. And my dad said he had to sign a piece of paper saying, yeah, you just bought this B-17. The other symbols are the squadron indicator. Now that's going to change, over time. When they figured out, oh, we got this join-up areas, we have to make clear who's who. All this changed to make it better. Crew positions, real quick. Navigator and bombardier up front. Flight deck had the pilot, co-pilot, and a little jump seat. There's a flight engineer he also operated this turret. Then you got the bomb bay, the catwalk, leading to the radio operator's compartment, ball turret gunner, 2 waist gunners left and right, and the tail gunner. Quickly do this again. In my dad's case, this was his crew: Mel Schulstad, pilot, Christensen, Embach, Saiz, Pacheco, Sherman, Roth, Stevens, Soria, and Dobbins. On this particular mission on January 23rd, 1943, the flight surgeon grounded my father because he had the flu and he was in the infirmary. And they also moved the original navigator, Ronaldo Seiss up to be the group lead navigator because he was such a good, bombardier, and they put another substitute, Ewell McWright, in his place, and Lieutenant Joe Haas flew in place of my father. Quick look at the front end. This is the flight deck, and again, the flight engineer sat in a little jump seat behind the pilot and the co-pilot. Which side is the pilot on? It's a quiz. The left, okay. And I don't know, maybe Tank could tell us, what do you think the hydraulic systems in this B-17 were like, Hank? Could you be a 140-pound guy? You probably couldn't. I mean, you had to have a lot of physical strength to fly a B-17. Navigator, bombardier. Up in the front of the plane, you can see the navigator on the left, the bombardier on the right. Maybe you can make out the, I can't even tell from this point. Is that a Norden bomb sight or something else? What do you think, Rich? Could be, all right. At the early model, one of the problems with the B-17F, it had no nose gun. So the engineering department quickly decided, let's bend a little metal and we'll put a 50 caliber cheek gun that points kind of straight ahead, and we'll do that on the right side, and the navigator in his spare time can operate the left gun, and the bombardier on the right side can operate the right gun. Well, anyway, there you can see in the bottom right, what it looks like with these 50 cals mounted inside. And you can see what their flight gear was like too. Okay, flight engineer, top turret gunner. I think that's self-explanatory. These are the beats me enlisted crew members, gunners. 5 of them were gunners, and one was a 4 of them were gunners. The flight engineer doubled as a gunner, and the radio operator, this guy, at the beginning of the war, he had his own, I think it was a 23 millimeter machine gun in the radio compartment. After about 8 months of flying, they decided, no, too many radio operators shot off the tail part of the B-17, so we're taking their gun away, okay? So he didn't have a gun after November of '43. There he is, radio operator, waist gunner. Now, what's wrong with this picture from a combat perspective? Bare arms, yeah, you freeze. So let's see what a real waist gunner looks like. You ready? Here's a real waist gunner. So what's all that stuff on the bottom of the fuselage? Brass. My dad said, all my damn gunners, they all tried to sneak on 30 extra rounds of, 50 caliber ammunition, and if you have 8 guys doing that, well, you created more drag on the airplane. But anyway, that's what a waist gunner survived in. And of course, those 2 portals, windows, are open air. There's no glass there. It's open air. That's why it's so cold inside this plane. Ball turret gunner, I won't talk about that too much. Doesn't look like a very comfortable place to be for 6 hours. And a tail gunner, pretty lonesome back there, but okay. The recap. Anybody have any questions on the 10 positions? I think you got it all figured out. All right. Crossing the Atlantic, my father kind of described how they flew from Kellogg Field in Michigan to Gander, and then one other stop somewhere in the Canadian provinces out east, and then all the way across the Atlantic to Scotland, Prestwick, Scotland, spent the night there, and then they worked their way down to Molesworth. Okay, any questions on that? And of course, lots of B-17s were doing that. Typically, the B-17s that cross the Atlantic would just have the 4 officers, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, all the enlisted guys, to include the ground crew, maintenance folks, went by ship. What was the name of your dad's ship? The Queen Mary. Where did it sail from? New York. And 10 days, 2 weeks? 10 days, and of course there were U-boats running around out there, so they would go in convoys. If you haven't seen a good movie about the convoy system in the Battle of the Atlantic, Tom Hanks had a movie called Greyhound. Is that right? Anybody remember? It's a pretty good film if you want to know how the Battle of the Atlantic was being waged with U.S. merchant ships fighting U-boat crews. Yeah, that was the fast way to get there. Yeah. Okay, a little bit on organization. All organizations had a group headquarters. The commander was a full colonel. The vice commander was a full colonel. They had an op officer and a maintenance officer, and then there were 4 squadrons, bombardment squadrons. The one I was interested in was my father's, of course, the 360th Bombardment Squadron, but they were all pretty much the same, 12 B-17s, 250 to 300 men, and then you had your technical support. Maybe somebody can help me here. What's the difference between armament and ordnance? I'm not sure. Okay, so armaments, the machine guns, that makes sense because they had a lot of machine guns. Someday I won't have time tonight to tell you how did they get the gunners to practice with their machine guns in the air and where to aim. That's a real, oh, you did that? You know. Your dad did.
He flew in the plane towing the target.
Yeah, well, they would have another plane, typically that B-17E model that had the big red circles in it, don't hit me, and they would tow out with a cable 200 feet behind them a big, it's like a big white, what do you call it when you wear your, well, they issue one when you go to a hotel. It's a bathrobe, a huge long bathrobe, and that's what you'd shoot at. You know, hopefully not getting anywhere near the tow aircraft, but hitting, and I don't even know how you knew if you actually hit the thing. Yes?
Different colored tracers.
Okay.
Went through it, left the mark on it.
Okay. So you probably couldn't tell when you shot, but when you got back, you could look at the sleeve and say, "Oh, why they really got that gun." Okay, thank you. See, I knew I was going to learn something tonight. So it's good. Okay, I think we're near the end. Beats Me lived like 4 months from production, rollout, across the Atlantic. 11 missions later, shot down. So this is a recap of that mission, the 11th mission. Now look at these 2 B-17Fs. What, did the front ends look similar? No. You know, one's been modified with 4 50 caliber machine guns added, and the other one still must have just got there, doesn't have any that I can see. So keeping track of what airplane has what equipment, a bit tough, but the engineering officer figured all that out. Mission 11 occurred on 23 January 1943 over Brittany. All right, there's a picture of Brittany. This was the biggest U-boat base that the French had at Lorient, and this is a little town where the B-17 was shot down and crashed. How many of you have been to Mont Saint-Michel? See, okay, that orients you. This is the whole Brittany Peninsula. Up here is Normandy, and over here is Paris, okay? All right, now, why the Battle of the Atlantic? This chart shows it. The chart shows you the tonnage of all the merchant ships that the U-boats were sinking between December of 41, i.e. the beginning of the war for the United States, and the middle, or May of 1943, all those big spikes. So the Germans were eating our shorts, basically. So that's why the 8th Air Force was told, you're going to be bombing U-boat bases. And at the same time, the U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy were hunting U-boats at sea. There's this thing called the Enigma. Anybody want to give me 1 minute on the Enigma?
Looked like a typewriter. It was encoder, decoder.
Yeah, the Brits had finally figured out a way to decode the German naval message traffic to say, send all the U-boats from Brest to this location in the North Atlantic because we know there's a convoy coming across from New York, whatever. So once we broke their code, that helped solve this problem as well as the B-17s attacking the home bases. All right, this particular base, Lorient, had 30 subpins. So they could take out of the water 30 German submarines and service them, fix them, reload them with torpedoes, send them back out. And obviously they could enter and exit underwater. It was a very tough target. In fact, I would have to say, if I've read all the volumes of the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, and basically it said the Royal Air Force and the U.S. Air Force did not do any significant damage to the U-boats while they were in base because they had 48 inches of reinforced concrete with rebar in it on the top of that structure. So no bombs would actually penetrate that concrete. So we had to attack or nibble around the edges, kill the commander, turn off the electricity, attack the ammunition, attack the fuel supply. Here's the flight plan. Not the exact one, but close enough. So here's jolly old England, here's London, here's the Molesworth. So follow the line, exit over the southwest part of England, ingress over Brittany, line up with the IP, attack the target, turn right, and go home. Okay, good theory. Here's what happened actually on the mission, 23 January. The 1st Bombardment Wing dispatched 73 B-17s. Primary target was Lorient. Time of target, 1:50 p.m. local. Ordnance load, 86 tons of bombs, probably 1,000-pounders. 5 B-17s lost, 1 aircraft is damaged. Secondary target was the 19 B-17s attacked the U-boat base north of Lorient called Brest. Time of over target was similar, about 20 minutes later. Ordnance load, 45 tons of bombs, no B-17s were lost. All right, let's recap that. Next slide will let me do that. Okay. First 11 missions. Mission 1, U-boat base. Mission 2, U-boat base. Mission 3, U-boat base. Mission 4, U-boat base. Mission 8, U-boat base. Mission 9, U-boat base. Mission 11, U-boat base. So you can see, Battle of the Atlantic, Priority 1, kill submarines. Okay, first mission, not very successful. 16 airplanes took off, all 16 aborted. No damage. Second mission, 21 airplanes launched, 2 aborted, 19 attacked the target, no losses. Different targets, Saint-Nazaire, 7 planes out of 18 aborted. The next mission, 12 aircraft were planned, 1 was lost. A bad day, 23 January. 21 airplanes from the 303rd Bomb Group were launched, 7 were destroyed. But the good news was that January 1943, go to the summer of 43. Then with breaking the German naval code, with B-24s now diverted to attack submarines in the open sea, with the invention of a new type of naval vessel. Maybe one of my Navy friends can help me. What is a corvette? A what? Small destroyer. So we augmented the destroyer force, both the U.S. Navy destroyers and the Royal Navy's Coastal Command and the Royal Navy's destroyers with a smaller, I think it was a Canadian design corvette. So we had more vessels attacking submarines than ever before. And so this one here, this is actual submarines lost. And I think in total, there's a book I read called Iron Coffins. I think the German Navy lost like 1,110 submarines and they scuttled 43. basically we wiped out their submarine fleet. But it took until, 1945. By January 1943, it was still a problem. Final thoughts. Woo! Oh, my God. World War II was a proving ground for modern theories of air warfare. Many of the Army Air Force's senior officers, a lot of them had been in the cavalry in World War I. And now I was a lieutenant, now I'm a lieutenant colonel, and they put me as the second in command of a bomb group. Well, hell, I don't even know how to fly as well as these other guys. So it was a learning experience. I mean, it was kind of, the second bullet says it, evolve and adapt. And that's really the theme of, if you listen to the rest of the film about my father, was every week, almost every third day, it was kind of like, we got to change this, we got to change this, we got to change this. Adapt, adapt, adapt. Learn from yesterday's mission and apply it to tomorrow's mission. And then the other thing was, okay, November 42 to January 43, how was that compared to November 44 to January 45? I mean, when my dad first got to England, nobody said, oh, by the way, how many do I have to fly before I go home? There wasn't any. Quickly, within like 60 days, they said, okay, if you fly 25, you can go home. And then after a while, the attrition rate dropped. They said, well, now you got to fly 30 before you can go home. And then after a while, they said, oh, okay, you got to fly 35 before you can go home. But on the other hand, the Germans failed one of the major lessons of basic math. It takes 21 years to grow a 21-year-old. So as soon as we started to eat into the Luftwaffe's fighter corps heart, they didn't have the follow-on replacements to man. They could make the machines, but they couldn't man those machines with really good fighter pilots. So my story is that my personal hero is General Jimmy Doolittle. He took over the command of the 8th Air Force in February 1944. And he said, there was a rule. I'm changing the rule. The rule was, you fighter pilots are going to escort the B-17s to their targets, and you're going to stay with them and protect them, and then you're going to escort them back. Jimmy Doolittle said, the hell with that. You guys are going to go ahead of them, and some of you are going to stay with them, and you're going to attack German fighters at their airfields. And you're going to get there a half hour ahead of the bombers. And so you're going to shoot down fighters when they're taking off, and you're going to shoot down fighters when they're landing and refueling. And to me, that was a fantastic dynamic shift in philosophy, and it worked. That's my theory. So there were different air wars. My dad stayed in Europe for 33 months. I'm going to tell you about this book for a minute. This book was written by a Frenchman. I know him. His father owned a farm in Pluvigner, Brittany, where this B-17 that my father was supposed to be on but wasn't on crashed. It was shot down. So how did that happen? Basically, 21 B-17s were approaching the submarine base, but they were following the edict from the previous week. The tighter your formation, the better defensive firepower you have, so stay tight. Well, unfortunately, Joe Haas, the pilot that took my father's place, was the 21 plane in the first group. The second group kind of crept ahead. I think probably what happened was the bombardier walked up to the Norden bomb site and, he slipped and he pickled the bombs. Well, the bomb ripped the tail off of Beats Me. Joe Haas had no idea. All of a sudden, Beats Me flipped over, totally flipped over. I mean, the radio operator said he almost went out the roof. Of course, the roof was painting down. Turned 180 degrees, so you got 42 bombers going this way, one bomber going that way. The pilot is fighting to control the bomber. He barely gets under control, and all of a sudden, two Focke-Wulfs say, let's get that guy. Leave the 21 guy, I'm going to be an ace. Let's get that guy. So they shot down, beats me, and it crashed right in Pierre Neillon farm. Well, Pierre Neillon was the father of Hubert Neillon. So after 60 years of hearing this story, finally he retired. He's a banker. He's a brilliant guy. He says, I want to write a book, mainly for the people in Pluvigner. What are these Americans? Who are they? Where do they come from? Why did they come? So he wrote the book, and I helped him a little bit because he didn't know air warfare. He knew history. It'll probably piss a lot of you off because he takes each crew member and says, where did he grow up? Where did he go to school? What did he learn? And there's some things about American history that we probably know that he doesn't. He might take offense at. It's all right. And so I helped him with, then he said, I need an American English version. So I worked with two interpreters to do that because if you've ever been to Europe, English is different than American English, okay? So that's what the book is about. I don't really recommend it because to me there's 30% excitement, 8th Air Force, flying, training, adapting, 70% history of Pluvigner, history of Brittany, history of the big submarine base and who was there. I'm selling it for $8 a copy, but I'm warning you, you may not get full satisfaction. Anyway. All right. Different air wars. At the end of the war, like I said, they were sending over B-17s, raw aluminum. Some of the aircrew got there in like September 1944, and they had flown their 35 missions by December 30th of 1944. In other words, we were ganging up. We were able to do a lot of things. I'm going to wrap up here. Yeah, bullet one, self-explanatory. The attrition rate changed dramatically between 1942 and 1945. But early on, here's a little known fact. The 8th Air Force, not the US Air Force, the 8th Air Force in the early part of the air war sustained more casualties in World War II than the entire US Marine Corps in 4 years of fighting, okay? 47,000 casualties. And there were these special people. The Brits called them the gremlins. We called them ops research or ops research systems analysts who coped with problems of where do we tell the gunners to aim? Should they aim at the enemy fighter, ahead of the enemy fighter, way ahead of the enemy fighter? All kinds of operational problems. How close do you have to get to a B-17 before the backwash perturbs your flight characteristics? If you get too close, that's bad. If you get too far, then you're breaking the unit integrity rule. Lots of problems. Challenging, but target selection. Well, I could talk about that, but just to say, I think target selection went pretty good. It was the weather, the cold, the oxygen masks that made a problem. At the end of the war, we found a bunch of guys who owned POL refineries, guys who owned POL storage areas, guys who built Kaiser ships, guys who built power plants. And they went over to Germany, 90 of them or so, and they visited all these targets, and they took apart how successful or unsuccessful the bombing campaign had been. Wrap up. 208 volumes for Europe, 108 for the Pacific. Conclusion, Allied air power was decisive in the war in Western Europe. Hindsight inevitably suggests that air power might have been employed differently or better. Nevertheless, it was decisive. In the air, its victory was complete. And again, I say thank you, Jimmy Doolittle, for unleashing the P-51 Mustang on the Luftwaffe. At sea, the contribution with naval power brought an end to the U-boat threat. And on land, I haven't even talked about the Normandy invasion and how they used B-17s ahead of the advancing armies. That's another subject for another day. Anyway, and it brought the German economy, which sustained the armed forces, to virtual collapse. I'm going to read one thing to you, and then we're going to quit. This is from February 1944, and I'm talking about, I'm a Dutch housewife that sits in Holland in my kitchen, and I'm kind of halfway between Molesworth Air Base in England and Berlin, okay? An almost unimaginable magnitude of sheer force kept B-17s in flight, to say nothing of a formation of B-17s. Although the bomber stream in February 1944 was at 27,000 feet in altitude when it passed over Holland, a young Dutch housewife watched her husband and her daughter remove dishes from a shelf in the kitchen, wrap them all up in towels, and place them on the floor so they wouldn't be damaged while their house trembled. It would take 3 hours for all the B-17s to pass overhead. How long was the parade of bomber boxes, or combat boxes, marching toward the German capital? When the first wave of flying fortresses reached Berlin, the last bomber was still back over the Zuiderzee in Holland. The stream of bombers from one end to the other was 360 miles long. Group after group passed over Berlin. Altogether, 90 minutes would elapse when the entire bomber force passed over the German capital. All right, any questions? Thank you for your attention. So do we want to do something first, or is it all right to do questions? Okay.
We got a couple minutes for questions. Anybody raise their hand? Right back here.
Well, thank you for your presentation. Of the three who survived, what were their crew positions?
Okay, the three that survived were the radio operator, Charles Roth, and the navigator and bombardier. And they were actually able to jump out of the B-17. I think when the bomber flipped over and it went the other direction, they were kind of cut off in the nose. And so two of them were up in the front, and as you know from watching Gregory Peck get in and out of his B-17, there's a hatch right there you can get out of the plane. Those two jumped out there. I think the pilot and the co-pilot were trapped. You know, they had no way to get out other than the window. And the radio operator, he had his own private compartment, and he came back to try to help the waist gunners. And he could see that Jerry Dobbins was having difficulty, got tangled up, and he tried to get both of them to the rear door, the rear compartment, and Chuck Roth got there first, and the airplane lurched, and it basically ejected Chuck Roth. He didn't jump, he got thrown out, and then the plane just went down and killing Dobbins. So the three that parachuted were caught within 4 hours by the German army, and they spent, 30-some months in Stalag Luft 3. And Rich has a book here about Stalag Luft 3, which is a private place for aviation POWs. And I have to say, from what I've read and understood, that if you were an airman in captivity, you got a lot better treatment than if you weren't.
Any other questions?
What is the link for the rest of your dad's show?
Oh, can you?
It was 30 minutes.
Huh?
The program is
Oh, the length. I'm sorry. I thought the link.
for the link.
We have that link, and we can.
Yeah, we'll post that on our
Yeah.
website page.
Yeah. It's a PBS show out of Seattle, and and you saw 10 minutes of the 30. So, thank you.
One more? Okay, did you say your dad did finish his 40 missions?
Well, that's a complicated answer, but I'm going to do it in 1 minute. Because the requirements shifted, he loved to fly. And when his crew was shot down, they gave him a week to get well, and then they said, okay, you're now the group armaments officer. So after about 4 weeks of that, he said, no, I want to fly again. So they let him fly. He was actually, because he kept extending, everybody else said, I want to go. 25, I'm out here. 30, I'm out here. He kept extending. He was in Molesworth for 33 months because he kept extending. He finally ended up as the ops officer, and the ops officer, every 5th mission, he would actually personally have to fly and lead the group. The other 4 out of 5, he'd pick somebody that he knew was a very steady, solid thinking individual to lead the group. So he ended up flying 11 missions as the group lead. And after a while they said, that's dangerous. Let's give them a 2-for-1 credit. So he flew 33, but he got credit for 44.
Thank you.
And he stayed till after VE Day. So, I mean, he wasn't even around when I was born in 1945 in April. My mother was an Army nurse. You know how those things happen. Well, thank you again for your attention, and if you're interested in the book, come up and, or do you have, Oh, this
Thank you, John.
This is a picture of Beats Me here, sorry.
A couple of things before everybody takes off, if you have time. I have some closing comments here, and then we're going to bring Chris up. 2 quick stories, though, Evolve and Adapt. So Curtis LeMay, John mentioned how he came up with the formation thing. The other thing he came up with, and I didn't learn this until I was talking to a vet at World War II weekend, is he said, I sat in the front of the plane and I dropped bombs. I said, you were a bombardier? And he says, no, I was a toggler. And I said, a toggler, what's that? And he said, well, early in the war, every plane had a bomb sight and the bombardier dropped the bombs. But LeMay figured out we don't need all of those bombardiers, and so only the lead plane needs to have a bombardier. And when he says bombs away, all the other planes in the squadron will drop their bombs. But the Germans knew the lead plane had a bombardier, so there was always another plane somewhere in the formation that had another bomb sight and bombardier. And the other real quick story, and this was when the Dutch girl was talking. I was over in Germany at a Gasthaus, and I was sitting there just having a beer, and a Belgian officer sat down next to me. He was a colonel, I was a lieutenant. And we started chatting, and I mentioned that my dad had been a ground crew chief on B-17s in World War II. And his eyes kind of teared up, and he said, let me shake your hand. When you go home, you shake your dad's hand. And I said, well, he was only a ground crew chief. He said, it doesn't matter. He said, let me tell you what happened. He says, I was a boy, I was 8 years old, and I was living in Belgium. And we would see the contrails of the B-17s coming over. And he said, occasionally they would drop bombs on my village. And he said, but we did not complain because we knew that that was going to help shorten the war and create freedom for us. And so the fact that his village had been bombed and that he was still grateful really struck a chord with me. So quick notes before I bring Dr. Chris Hoffman up. John has copies of the book, which he helped author, if you want to purchase one. We also have a number of books up here you're free to come look at about B-17s in general, and the 303rd in particular. They're not for purchase, but you're welcome to look at them. I also printed out copies of some photos that may be of interest that my dad took. The 303rd flew more missions than any other B-17 group in the 8th Air Force. They flew 364 total missions. Some famous people that flew one or more missions with the 303rd include Walter Cronkite and Clark Gable. Anyone who has been to the Air and Space Museum on the Mall in Washington may have seen that big 75 by 25-foot mural in the World War II section that features a B-17. That's Thunderbird from the 303rd Bomb Group. And it was drawn by Keith Ferris, and there's some information about that up here. Down near Savannah, Georgia, in the town of Pooler, right on I-95, is the the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force. It features a large mural that is Molesworth, and immediately next to it is a Nissen hut where you can sit down and watch a video about a pre-mission briefing. And the sign next to the door says, "Briefings every half hour by order of the CO 303rd Bomb Group, Molesworth." 303rd had 2 Medal of Honor recipients. One, Forrest Vossler, is featured on a panel at the Air Force Museum in Dayton. If you've been there, they had recently restored Memphis Belle. And Memphis Belle is sitting in one corner of one of the hangars there, and there are a couple of panels. One of them features Forrest Vossler, who won posthumously the Congressional Medal of Honor. Speaking of the Memphis Belle, who can tell me what it's known for? Anybody? Anybody seen the movie? So the Memphis Belle, somebody knows?
First to finish at 25, but were they really?
So it was sent home, the crew was feted, and there are movies and documentaries that was the first B-17 to finish 25 missions, and the crew was sent home to go on a war bond tour and travel the country and see families and ask for money to sell war bonds. Incorrect. The first plane to finish, B-17 to finish 25 missions was in the 303rd, and it was called Hell's Angels. And the name is why they were not recognized as the first crew, because nobody wanted hell in the publicity of selling war bonds. And because of that, they knew, even before they ever finished 25 missions, that they were not going to be recognized for that purpose. So that's it. I'm going to ask Chris to come up and give some final comments.
Welcome, and we're so happy you came tonight to speak for us on the 8th Air Force. We have a lot of interest in this. We have a lot of families in the audience too, like Rich and others who have family members who were in the Army Air Corps during World War II, or I do too. My grandfather was in the Army Air Corps, et cetera, and my great uncle Joe as well. But anyway, so I want to have some concluding remarks here tonight. John, thanks so much for educating us on the your father's story and the last mission of his aircraft, and also on the history of the 8th Air Force, the B-17 bombers, the different tactics and strategies as well. I think we learned some things tonight, so thank you so much, and thanks for doing it in such a very clear way and insightful way as well. Okay, so Rich told me before we came out tonight here that he was saved for me the announcements of the upcoming speakers, so I'm going to do that now. May 1st, we're going to have John Capello, who is president of the Halyard Mission Organization. He founded the group and is the president. He wanted to celebrate the history. That also involves Army Air Corps guys, too. They came in transport planes and bomber planes to what's now Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and downed Allied airmen were then picked up. These planes would land in German-occupied areas, and they come in a kind of a ferry service and ferry them back out of harm's way. And so he'll tell us that story about that. He has a whole organization. He travels the country and the world talking about that mission. He spends a lot of the time in Serbia as well. It seems like every year, where a lot of that took place, actually. June 5th, we're going to have a real treat for you, back to some World War II veterans. Eli Razan was a U.S. Navy, was in the U.S. Navy during World War II. Pacific Theater and Atlantic, battled the Atlantic and as well as Pacific. He was mostly in the Pacific. 40-41 he was in the Atlantic, but early 42 he went across the Panama Canal through on a ship called the USS Griffin, which was a submarine tender ship, and took care of servicing U.S. combat submarines. And most of the War 42 to 45 he was in the Pacific Theater of Operations, conducting operations there. And so also, we're hoping that two more World War II veterans, we're going to have real extravaganza that night. We're hoping that also
Andy Valero and Joe Landry, two Battle of the Balls veterans, will be there for us as well. That's still, I guess, maybe getting finalized, but we'll at least have Eli there, and we're hoping the other two gentlemen will be there too and have a real extravaganza for us, the 3 World War II veterans in one night. It'll be a special night. June 5th. Okay. And also the World War II air show, World War II weekend air show will be in Reading right after our meeting starting, I guess, June 6th to 8th in Reading, Pennsylvania. All right, so we have our Helmet Community guys in the back. We don't want to forget them. They come and do their job every month, and we're grateful for that. And Authentic World War II helmets, if you guys want to donate any funds for us, we do have monthly operating expenses, as you know, every single month, and we'd appreciate your support. Thanks to all of our attendees tonight, both online and here in person, and thanks to our volunteers who helped make it happen, and to our speaker tonight. Everyone, thanks for being here. And like Rich said, please feel free to come up here and shake the hand of the speaker, see the books and pictures and displays up here. And if you want to purchase a book, I think $8 sounds like a good deal to me. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you next time on May 1st. And have a good evening. Thank you so much. Thank you.